Okay, the professional courtesy that I generally grant when we start these presentations, or I do any meeting for that matter, that's expired. So in the interest of keeping the virtual electronic summit on schedule, we're going to begin. I want to welcome all of you who are out there, and I do have to say it is very strange to not see you. I just know I can see kind of a number that's kind of at the top of the screen that lets me know that at least somebody is out there. So thank you for taking the time to join us today. I know the summit is really just a couple of hours old. I'm Vel Omazic. I am the co-founder and executive director of Canada's Music Incubator. If you don't know me and don't know CMI, we're a national not-for-profit organization. We're based in Toronto, where I am right now. And we essentially mentor, coach, developing emerging independent artists and managers with the objective of helping them build sustainable careers and businesses. That's in a nutshell what we do. You can visit our website and I'll put all that information up at the end if you want to find out more information about that. I myself have been part of the Alberta Electronic Music Conference. This would be my third year participating. What I'm doing right now is trying to visualize myself on the Sky Bridge at the National Music Center, because that's normally where I would present. I'm a bit of a jack of all trades. The first year I was out there, I did a presentation on rights and royalties, copyright, in addition to moderating a panel or two. Last year I was out there doing a presentation on determining and knowing your live performance value, in addition to moderating a one-on-one conversation with an entertainment lawyer about contracts. So that's kind of my background. I'm a big supporter of the event. My kudos to the organizers for pulling this together very quickly. And I'm grateful for the invitation to return and talk about a subject really that was my entrance into the music business. So some 30 years ago now, believe it or not, I was a snot-nosed young journalism student at Carleton University and who stumbled past an old bulletin board, job board, where a record label, a major record label called Polygram Records, which has long since been absorbed into the Universal Music family, they needed somebody to specifically write bios. And that's essentially was my ticket into the music industry. And so I think there was a span there in my first year or so. That's what I did every day, in addition to some other writing, newsletters and press releases. But, pretty much every week there would be the internal mail guy who would show up with the new releases for the week. Vinyl at the time still quickly switched over to CD, but he would drop a bunch of albums in my in tray in terms of whatever the new releases were for the week. And it was my job then to write bios to accompany all of those releases, whether they were domestic or they were international. So that was my ticket into the music industry, and I kind of grew and went along from there. Within a few years, I found myself at Sony Music, and I wasn't writing bios at that point. By that time, I had graduated and was promoted to the point where I was running the media relations department and in charge of the people who were writing bios. So I was able to bring that experience. And then in my work at CMI, I don't write bios anymore, but with all the artists and the people that we work with, I would say that I probably review and edit. That's what I do mostly these days, probably somewhere between 50, 60, maybe 70 artist bios per year. So that's kind of my background. That's why I'm speaking to you today. I'm going to speak really from the wisdom and the experience I've gleaned over my time in the music industry. There are lots of different approaches to writing bios, and there is some creative license as you go through the process. What I'm simply going to do is share with you my experiences and some of my best practices and tips to help you deal with bios. Now, before we actually go any further, I created a poll. So I'm going to try this because it's a bit weird again. And if there's any kind of technical problems, it's probably user error. But in order to kind of get this started, I just want to ask the people who are out there a simple question. So I'm going to launch a poll right now. And if you don't mind filling it out, I just want to ask a couple of questions about your experiences when dealing with bios and your own bios. So give me some context as we go through the presentation over the next hour. So it should be coming up on your screen right now. It says in progress. Those are simple yes or no questions. There's 4 of them. Feel free to quickly tap in, and I'm curious for you to just answer those questions. I will leave the poll up there. Oh, here come some of the responses now. And my big question is, have you written your own bio, which everybody has? And then how many actually enjoy writing their own bio, which is usually a problem most people don't hear. I think you're seeing the results with the people that have voted right now. So I'm going to leave that poll up for now, and then we can kind of come back to it. Other people might find it. I don't think it's interfering with your screen, but I'm going to minimize just to be safe. Okay, so let's roll into the presentation. I think I've covered my my introductory points. Once again, welcome to the Virtual Electronic Summit Day 1. I usually roll in on the Friday night around midnight, flying into Calgary, and then spend the weekend. I should also mention, by the way, that I am available for one-on-one meetings on Saturday and Sunday. So if you go to the website, you'll see, I guess, this on the schedule. You'll see this this webinar on the schedule, and there'll be a link where you can sign up with me. I'm making myself available essentially most of Saturday and most of Sunday. So if you're interested in signing up to talk about your bio, one-sheet EPKs, or quite frankly, I'm willing to talk to you about whatever you want to talk about, whatever your challenges are. I leave that option open to you as well. So you're welcome to sign up. There are still some time slots available. I checked the schedule, so please sign up for that. Okay, so now in the interest of, again, keeping things rolling, let's get into the presentation. So when it comes to today, what are we going to go through? Well, here is the overview of what I'd like to cover with you in the next hour or so in terms of this presentation. So the purpose of bios, right? What are some best practices? What are the common mistakes? And there's usually 2 or 3 big ones that I see almost without fail. I would say 99% of the time. The investment in bios in terms of if you're going to hire somebody, what's that going to cost you? And how does that work? I'm going to give you some tips in terms of writing your own bio. I call it instant bio, just kind of a quick down and dirty little system that I've concocted through our work at CMI in terms of how you can do this. And within an hour, it's not crowd dinner, but it's kind of within that. It's kind of got that instant bio kind of concept. Probably within an hour, you can sketch out or have a completed bio. Then I want to talk about some basic structural things to keep in mind. Style, and when I'm talking about style, I'm talking things that are connected to writing and certain rules when it comes to, titles of albums and titles of singles and the use of numbers and punctuation, things like that. So that's what we call style rules. And then we're going to talk about the different versions of the bios that you're going to require, because there are multiple versions required, which we're going to get into. Okay, so, and then of course, once we get through that, that's going to be the bulk of the presentation. And then after that, we're going to get into the one sheet, and we're going to talk about EPKs. So that'll be on the back end of the presentation. So again, I hope you're with me. I cannot gauge any kind of reaction here. I don't see your faces longing and thirsting for this information. I can't judge your reaction. I'm hoping that you're going to stay with me. I'm going to do my best to help you as much as I can here in the next hour. Okay, so let's keep going. Artist bios. I hope you heard the sound effects. Put a lot of work into that. Okay, now the introduction, right? The artist bio, right? Really, the way I like to describe it, the artist bio is essentially your, or often your first impression, and that's with either the industry or with the media. And so, where are people going to find or make that first impression with you? Usually, it's music. Usually, somebody hears a song somewhere or is told about an artist or a song, and then people are going to find you, and they're going to find you either through social media, right? So make sure that you've got a bio in your social media platforms, obviously your website, that's pretty standard. Streaming, I still go through the streaming platform. Spotify specifically is what I have, and I'm amazed at how many artists do not have the bio information populated, one sheets and EPKs, right? So that's often, and that's how people are going to find you, depending on how you are brought to their attention, whatever the case may be, okay? And so now let's get into the purpose. So really the common purpose, the main purpose of the bio is to introduce the artist. I'm going to assume that we mostly have artists in the room, and I don't know that. So let's assume, or let's go from the perspective that it's artists in the room. And the bio there, the purpose of it essentially is to introduce the artist and their work, okay? So that's number one. That's obvious, right? Number two, right? And this is where, when I mention this point when it comes to writing bios, a lot of artists tend to relax because they get flustered or they're uncomfortable, like a lot of artists, like a lot of people, quite frankly, about speaking or writing about themselves. So when I say focus on the current release, what I'm simply doing here is liberating you from having to talk about yourself and rather focus on speaking and writing about your current release. After all, that's what you're doing, that's your focus, that's what you want people to pay attention to. This is what you spent all your money and your time and poured your heart into. And so if you take it from the perspective of telling me that story, right, which is kind of counterintuitive to the word bio, and this will kind of trips a lot of people up, but make the focus your current release, okay? That's the purpose of it. Number 3 is influence, right? The bio is there to help you pitch editors, producers, programmers, and then other industry types, potentially, or other media types, bloggers, et cetera, to generate what we call editorial coverage. And when I talk about editorial coverage, I'm simply talking about somebody making the choice to write about you, to post about you, to share anything to do with you. So to have you interviewed on a radio station or a TV show or have a post on a blog, right? That is what we call an editorial decision or editorial coverage. So what your bio does often is help influence, right? Because people are going to read that story and say, oh, okay, this sounds like somebody that I'm interested in, somebody I want to talk to. I'm going to give them some time, some space, some airtime, whatever the case may be. Okay, so to influence editorial decisions in the purpose of generating some editorial coverage. Okay, and then the bio also is a communication tool that informs the industry, right? And any industry partners that you may be working with. So if you're looking to hire, for example, somebody to do your digital marketing or a publicist or somebody to represent you with streaming or radio promotion, hiring photographers, videographers, and any of these other people, agents, labels, publishers, you name it, anybody in the industry, this is kind of a tool to kind of give them an indication of who you are. And of course, the other person that is not on this is the fan, right? So the fan is going to come across your bio, probably read that on the website too. But think of it as a tool really to inform industry partners primarily. Okay, that's the way I look at it. Okay, and then to me, it is also a marketing sales tool, right? So this is something, it's in your PR toolbox, so to speak, and you're going to be using your bio probably with some additional assets that you've created to pitch yourself, right? To pitch yourself for opportunities, whether that's live performance or sync opportunities or anything else that you might be looking to do. So it serves a purpose as a marketing and sales tool as well. Okay, so that's kind of the purpose. So from there, what I'd like to do is move into best practices, right? And so to me, number 1 best practice for bio, I tell everybody, right? Keep the bio to facts, right? Facts largely related to your release. Okay, this is not prose, it's not literature, or as I'm saying here, it's not Shakespeare, it's not Dickens, right? People are not looking for that kind of writing, and you're not required to do it. So you can eliminate all that flowery, unnecessary language and just stick to facts and information. This also, right, frees up your mind and worrying about what do I have to write, what I'm going to put in my bio. Just stick to telling me the facts. That's all you got to do, okay? And then best practice number 2 I have is inject personality, okay? And so this is a very important piece, right? And by personality, I mean the artist's voice. Well, how do you insert voice into a bio? Well, the way you do that is by creating, and inserting, if you look at the language there, direct quotes, right? So I'm not talking about media quotes or anything that somebody's written. I'm talking about quotes that you actually generate, right? That you are able to create to thread into the bio narrative. And in my experience, 2 quotes usually will do the trick for you. You know, my general rule is I want a quote that's going to be connected to the single, because usually that's what's bringing people to you anyway and reading your bio. So I always want to do that, and that's what I'm trying to drive attention with and for is that single. So I usually have a quote about that, and then I might have a secondary quote, which could be about another track, or it could have something else to do with the project. But usually 2 will do the trick, right? And so that's important to me because it brings the bio to life, you know, and it allows you, gives you an opportunity to kind of have your artist kind of heard. People can kind of get a feel for what they're like. And so I think this is an important part of making a bio readable and helping you kind of frame and brand your artist as well. Okay, so that's number 2. Number 3, and I'm adamant for this, I'm a no hype guy. I don't think it's necessary. And I just use the example here because I see this a lot. And oftentimes when I edit bios, I always make this thing, you know, statement, statement, statement. Remember what I said, stick to the facts, right? So here's an example of a statement. And this is one common thing, and there's probably a zillion other variations. Maybe you recognize it, but she's taking the music world by storm with her new release, right? It's just not necessary, right? You don't have to say this. And I would argue with you that if you take these types of statements out of your bio, that you lose nothing. In fact, it'll actually improve the quality of your bio. So I'm no hype bio writer. That's my style. Again, you don't have to agree with me, by the way. What I'm sharing with you is my approach to bio. This is not the only way to do it. I'm going to say that again for if anybody who's joining in as the conversation is going on here. And I say go easy on the adjectives, right? So I actually have a no unique rule when it comes to bio writing. I do not allow that in any bio that I see. And if I see an artist write it, then I challenge them, right? So if you're going to say that you're unique, like that's what I call a statement, right? You're making a statement here. You know, their blend of R&B, electronic R&B music is unique, or their unique blend of R&B electronic, right? Well, what exactly makes it unique? Don't just say it. If you're going to say or make a statement, then I challenge you to always back it up. Okay, I generally find that it's best to avoid it at all purpose, in all ways. Like just stay away from that word if you can. And I hope you understand what I'm talking about there when I'm saying no hype, no statements. Leave the adjectives in the dictionary is what I always say. That's where they belong. You don't need them. Okay. Other best practices. If we continue on, and this is an important one to me. This is kind of the key. Right? I tend to advise artists to write their bio in a feature story article. So think about any article that you've read about any artist that you like, or maybe you remember an article that was written about you or something that you're working with, right? And it's in that, it's something that you would read in a newspaper, a magazine, a blog, whatever the case may be, right? So if you write in this style, right, that's another reason why, by the way, the quotes are important, because you can't have an article without attribution, quote, somebody saying something. So the idea here is if you write in the feature story style with quotes, right, with that artist voice, as I call it, it allows media to largely, if they choose to, simply cut and paste and post or publish without having to do a lot of work, editing, etc. So to me, there's a strategic reason also using this approach. Okay, so it makes a lot of sense. In terms of other bio best practices, very important. You can't assume that people know. You would be amazed at how often I say, what kind of music do you do? And usually this is something I'm going to see in the first sentence of your bio. It's no different than when you introduce yourself, right? Who you are, right? Where you're from, what kind of music do you do? It's something that you normally see right off the top. So don't assume that people know, right? So make sure you establish the genre style of music in your bio. And again, do you have to do it in the beginning? Not necessarily. It makes sense to me. I kind of like doing it right off the top. But again, there is some creative liberties in terms of the way that you choose to write and structure your bio. That's up to you, right? As a rule for me, I like to see it off the top so I know exactly what I'm dealing with. Okay, let's keep going. Number 6 is identify where you're from. Okay, so when you think about media in particular, media likes local, right? So I tell an artist, if you are from Cleveland, but you grew up in Toronto and you went to school in Montreal and you live in Calgary, well, for me, I'm from each and all of those cities whenever it's to my advantage, is what I'm trying to say. And maybe you're from a different country, right? So these are all things that come into play. I think you can use it to your advantage. Do you have to list everywhere that you ever lived? If you moved around a lot, not necessarily, but you want to use it if you're going to be on the road or pitching media in a certain city. If you have a tie to that city, then make sure that it's in there, right? Make sure it's in there because media, especially when you're out there on tour, etc., they like local angles. It's a big advantage. So I say take advantage of that. The one thing that often comes up, by the way, is people who are from small towns. They don't want to say they're from a small town. To me, honestly, I don't feel it matters. You don't have to be embarrassed. You are who you are. You're from wherever you're from. And to me, it's a non-issue. If you're from a small town, you can say this small town near Calgary or near Montreal or near Halifax, whatever it is. That's all you have to say. And you give people some kind of context. If you just leave it as a small town, people say, well, where the hell is that? Again, it's a simple fix, just providing some geographical context. And so that's a simple one. Identify where you're from, because that's usually one of the first questions you get. Who are you? Where you're from? What do you do? Again, it's good to answer that right off the top. Okay, let's keep going. Best practices, number 7. And this is one where artists sometimes struggle or give me some pushback, but it's identifying musical influences and comparable artists, right? Because again, if you're doing rhythmic or R&B electronic music, then maybe, there's certain artists that inspired that. And that's all you're really telling me. Influences is like inspiration, right? And then comparable artists is not necessarily you saying you're as good or in the same level as these artists. It's not comparing yourself. But what you're doing is you're giving me some kind of context or perspective in terms of the sound and the style that you do. It's a little bit of this, these my influences, and it sounds like, these are artists that are comparable, that are similar in their sound, their style, right? And for what that does for an industry person like myself or anybody else that you meet is that very simply allows them to hear it in their head. Okay, I get it. I understand what it is that you're doing, right? It's just helpful. If you tell me you're a singer or songwriter, well, that's pretty broad. That doesn't really help me. So you always want to give it a little bit more detail to help that person who's reading. Again, they don't know you, okay? And then something else that I often suggest to artists, and they don't think about too often, but oftentimes your influences might not necessarily be musical, right? It's very possible that you're influenced by other things in life. It could be, or other artists. It could be a visual artist, like a painter. It could be a poet. It could be, somebody that does sculptures or fashion or whatever it is. If you have other influences, I think that's not a bad thing to include as well. And I think that's interesting. And I think if I'm reading that, again, on the editorial side, oh, that's a different kind of artist. Okay, that's cool. That's something we can talk about. It might kind of set you apart a little bit. I wouldn't go crazy on that, but if it's legitimate, right, and you're into it, then I think that's something to at least consider and put on the table, right? Take a look at it. If it works, it works. If not, you can always take it out. It's your bio, okay? Moving on. Number 8, and I kind of touched on this already when I said, the focus of your bio, the writing of your bio should be on the current project. So by the current project, I'm talking your current single, EP, album, right? Whatever you're doing right now. And again, it takes the pressure off having to talk and write about just yourself, okay? And again, it's what you're working on. It's what you're selling. It represents the artist who you are now. So make that the focus. And this is something that I see fail in a lot of bios. I'll often read, and sometimes there's zero mention of anything that they're doing musically that's current, or usually it's the last paragraph. So I'm reading about everything that you did when you were 5 years old, 6 years old, through high school, and then somewhere way down there at the bottom, I get a sentence at the very end, and my new single is going to be coming out there. I'm telling you that most people aren't going to get to that last sentence, right? And the whole purpose of what you're doing around that campaign is to elevate, right, the awareness and the profile of that new project. So please, for God's sake, make that the focus, right? Okay, that's an important one. That's probably one of the more common mistakes, which we're going to get to, by the way, in a second. And so then how do you do that, right? So how do you focus on the current release? I guess this would be a follow-up. So to me, it's, again, sticking with facts, or maybe there's some anecdotes connected to the project, right? So there could be anything from, and again, these are some examples. You might have other ideas, but this is just to give you some jumping off points, perhaps some inspiration, right? So maybe it's the producer that you work with, or maybe you work with multiple producers. Maybe you had some high-level writers involved. Maybe the way you recorded it was interesting. Maybe you recorded in a cabin in the woods and there was no electricity and somebody was pedaling a bicycle to generate power so you can record, whatever. Maybe there's a concept or some inspiration that led to the creation of this thing. Maybe it was where you recorded. Maybe you recorded in multiple locations. Maybe you have some interesting instrumentation or production techniques that were used. Guest musicians. I mean, it is endless, right? So you can, as you're writing your bio, think about what's interesting here. What kind of facts, or are there any anecdotes that I can use here that are going to be interesting and help me tell the story of my current release? And so that's an important part. And I would challenge you as you're going through your bio writing stage to kind of consider, well, what is interesting here? Do I have something that I want to focus on? Right? And sometimes, honestly, there's nothing, right? So maybe it's going to just be a focus on the current release and, on the first single, and that's going to be it, or something not as exciting. You got to work with what you got and you make the best of it. But these are things at least to consider. And like I said, there may be other things that aren't on this list that might work for you. Okay, and number 10 is this. So this is what I call the background information. When I edit bios, I always use the letters BG, and there's usually an arrow that points down, because normally what I see is background information off the top or elevated in the bio. And I always tell people, push it down, right? Again, the focus has got to be on the current release. The background, historical information, whatever you want to call it, to me, plays a secondary and supporting role in the bio, right? And that could be anything from past releases to awards and accolades, things like that, maybe some education or other accomplishments that are in there. And usually to me, that's not multiple paragraphs. That's probably a single short paragraph at the end. That's the way that I approach it. So background information, secondary. Remember that, okay? And number 11, best practices, is that you're going to need multiple versions. And then I'm going to go through the 3 different versions. I'm going to do that a little bit later. But that's, there's 3 of them to be exact, I guess, is what I wanted to say there. And then in terms of best practices, I have one more. And this is another one that bugs me in bios, because when you write your bio, you probably heard the expression, set it and forget it. As independent artists, the last thing you want to do is always have to worry about something getting out of date and constantly having to go back and update. And what I've learned is that there is always a way, there's always a solution when you're writing your bio that you can come up with that doesn't actually have a statement like on tour this fall. Just think about that. If that bio is sitting on your website for a year, then I'm thinking, are you talking this fall? Or are you talking last fall? Or the new single comes out June 4th, right? And now it's August or September. So are we talking next year or last year? And so there's always solutions around that. So I try to avoid what I call specific dating in my bio. I try to be generic enough where I don't have to go back and update it and edit. I just want to forget about it, right? Sometimes maybe it can't be helped, but you want to keep that to an absolute minimum, all right? So avoid specific dating. And usually it's around tours and release dates in my experience, right? So keep that in mind. And as you're writing your bios, how can I say this, right, without having to worry about coming back to fix it in 2 or 3 weeks, right? So for example, I wouldn't say the new single comes out June 4th. I would say the new single title, and I would put in, 2020 or June 2020. And then I never have to change that. I don't have to change that. That's just a simple example. Okay, now, so those are some best practices, a dozen or so best practices that came to my mind. How am I doing on time here? Okay, about halfway. So let's move on to what I see as the most common mistakes. And without fail, number 1 mistake is what I call writing your bio in chronological order. And I understand why we see that, because just the term biography, right? It's kind of a life story. That's what you think about it, and that's the way you will write it. And I'm telling you again, from a business perspective, the way that I've told you already is to make it about your current release. Don't write your life story in chronological order. The simple fact is, no one cares. Okay? And they're not going to get to the most important part, which is your new release, if you bury it under a bunch of, your life story, that kind of stuff. So do not write your bio in chronological order. In fact, the way that you should write it is in reverse chronological, right? So what's happening now? Well, you always want to be current. As an industry person, I don't care what you did 5 years ago, quite frankly. I want to know, what are you doing now as an artist, right? What's important to you? What kind of artist? What kind of songs are you writing today? That's the most important thing. Okay, mistake number 2, excuse me, is that I don't care who you are, the basic rule is your bio should not be longer than a page, right? And the only exception I make, quite frankly, are for superstars, right? So that's a simple way to know. So what's a page, right? Depends on how you write, but it's probably going to be a few hundred words, right? So for me, I generally see it coming in around, 4 or 5 paragraphs, short paragraphs, by the way, right? So no longer than a page. That's pretty straightforward. Number 3, most common mistake is what I talked about going back to the beginning of this presentation, is that there's no personality. There's no artist quotes, nothing to bring the bio to life, to kind of introduce me to who the artist is, what they're like. Maybe they got a sense of humor, or they're sarcastic, or they're passionate about a particular subject or issue. If you don't have their voice included in there, well, then the bio is flat and it's a dry read. And then on top of that, without having that those direct quotes inserted, well, then the chances of your being picked up by a blog or a publication of some sort for posting and publication becomes limited, right? Because it's not written in that feature story approach as I talked about earlier. You need quotes for that. And so to me, I always will tell every artist, you need to inject some personality in here. Let's get a quote or 2 in there. Let's get the artist speaking. Okay, and where do those quotes come from? Right, like I said, you just make them up, right? That's all you got to do, right? You just make them up. You're allowed to do that. This is what happens in the world of PR. Not journalism. Journalists can't put words in your mouth, or they can't change the words that come out of your mouth to suit their needs. You, as the person writing your own bio, you can put whatever words in your mouth and in your bio that you want. You're allowed to do that, okay? Number 4 is what I talked about earlier. Again, what I call these empty declarative statements, right? Usually I see them maybe at the beginning of a bio, kind of like an opening sentence. People feel they need to kind of pull me in somehow with a big statement, or at the end, right? So here's a simple one that I would see, some variation of this is very common. She's a star on the rise and a talent to be reckoned. And that's kind of the last sentence. And again, as I say, take that sentence out. I promise you, you lose nothing in your bio whatsoever. In fact, you make it better. Okay, so based on those, let's move on to the process of writing bio. So if you're hiring somebody, if you've not gone through the process of writing your own bio, this is kind of the process that I would go through, or probably likely somebody who you would hire on your behalf. This is the process that they would go through, right? They would research. What does research mean? Well, I'm going to start with what you have out there in the world already. So I'm going to start with probably the music that you've released. I'm going to look at your old bios. I'm going to look at old PR materials, press releases. I'm going to look for any kind of interviews, whether they're written, radio, or TV, or blog posts, to give me a sense of where you're coming from and where you've been, right? And then I'm going to interview you, right? If you're an artist, I got to interview you now about the new project. What's happening here? Tell me the story of this release, right? So once I go through that, I'm going to probably record that. I'm going to go through the process of transcribing that, and then kind of start working on a draft outline, pulling out the pieces that I think are interesting. They're going to build kind of the meat of the bio, right? And then I go through the whole writing process, writing, editing, revisions, approvals. My experience, approvals were sometimes the hardest stage of it all, because artists always struggle with their bios. They're not sure. And then, of course, there's posting, and in some cases, there's maintenance. But that's essentially, if you're hiring somebody to do your bio, that's the process. So if you think about that, that's a fair bit of work, depending on the level of the artist. Okay, and then if you're going to pay, again, it really depends on who you're going to hire, right? So the investment to me could be anywhere from a couple $100, maybe a little bit more. It depends on the writer that you're going to hire. There's also a word rate. A lot of freelance journalists will work on what's called a word rate. And in Canada, I did a little research, and it can range anywhere from 10 to 15 cents per word. I generally would advise you to, if you're not comfortable doing your own bio, to see if you can find somebody that writes as a music journalist. That's something we did all the time. When I was working in the label system, that's kind of what we did. The people that were doing the interviews and the features at the big magazines or the newspapers at the time, those were the people that we would go, hey, on the side, do you freelance? Would you be willing to do the artist bio? Especially if we knew they were into the artist. And so that was always a good solution. I always encourage you to get samples of writing if you can find them, ask for them, and then you can talk to your network, whether it's other artists, managers, labels, to see if they have any suggestions or recommendations, of writers that they might have worked with, or journalists that might be willing to do it for you. Okay. Moving on, this is, maybe giving you a visual representation of the structure, right? So based on everything that I've said to you, this is kind of what the structure of the bio would look like, right? That's kind of that reverse chronological order, so that inverted pyramid, if you will, right? Where I start with the basic of the artist introduction, right? And it could be those points that are in there. I'm identifying the artist, where they're from, their genre, maybe some influences, right? That's kind of where I'm starting off, right? And then I get into the body of the bio, that kind of section 2 and 3, as I call it. And these two kind of are interconnected, right? So I'm inserting details, facts about the current release, and I'm going to intertwine that with some quotes, right? Some personality injection from the artist speaking about that, whether that's the single or the overall concept of the project, whatever the case may be. And then I get to the end, and I'm going to put in that bit of background, that last paragraph, which will be, things like maybe some personal information or previous releases, awards, accolades, things like that. So that's in a snapshot. Hopefully this kind of inverted pyramid gives you an idea of how to go about structuring your bio. Okay, so why do I recommend this approach? Well, this is why I do it. And again, I'm going to go back, if you come on late, say that really it's individual choice. And you don't have to do it this way. I like this for a couple of reasons. Okay, number one, right, especially these days with media, right, with the digital impact on traditional media and bloggers who aren't really experienced or professional trained journalists, right? There's fewer people to do all this work, right? And so they don't have the time, and sometimes they don't have the access to get interviews. And so if you take this approach as you're writing it, essentially you're basically doing their job, and you're handing them a finished piece of work, basically on a platter, is the way that I like to describe it. Okay, and so that's one of the main reasons why I advocate for this approach. Number two reason why I like this approach is that you're able to control the narrative. Okay, so I always remind artists, right, that your bio is the trigger for questions, especially when you're dealing with the media, right? And so if you're smart and you're thinking in advance, what is it that I want to communicate or share about this particular release? That's the kind of stuff when I'm talking about, telling the anecdotes and the story of your current release. That's the stuff that you want to put in there. And I will tell you, I've been on publicity tours all across Canada with all kinds of artists. And generally when you walk into an interview situation, the host, the producers, directors, they're all sitting there holding your bio, or it's on a screen, and they've got it highlighted, or they're looking at it, and that's kind of their roadmap for what they're going to ask you. So that's the smart approach, control the narrative, right? So when you walk into a situation, you're going to know the questions and you're going to be well prepared. It also avoids putting dumb things in your bio or being too cute, because if you do that, well, then guess what? You're going to answer that question, you're going to get tired of it pretty quick and say, and I've had many artists tell me over the years, boy, do I regret putting that in my bio, because everywhere I go now, people ask me that same stupid question, right? So don't put it in there, okay? Control the narrative. And then number three for this approach is, if you do it well, right? A blogger, journalist, media outlet, etc., especially if they're down in terms of staff and resources, chances are they might take that entire bio and publish it word for word, simply cut and paste. And in PR, this is awesome. This is complete control of the narrative. In the PR world, we call that victory, and I've spelled that out there. And I learned that lesson very quick. And people who know me often tell the story. When I first started writing bios, there was a point where I got some press clippings from another part of the country, and I opened it up and I looked at it. I started reading this. I said, "Oh, this looks familiar." And I realized it was exactly a bio that I had written word for word, and then somebody else had put their name on it, by so-and-so, and I can't remember, it was so long ago, but I do remember the instance. And then I was like, oh my God, again, coming out of journalism school, I said, how, this is unethical, this is plagiarism. And I walked into my boss, and he just looked at me and said, great fucking job. I still remember those words, right? And it's like, oh yeah, I'm not in journalism, I'm in PR. I've controlled the messaging, the narrative. They've taken it word for word. And so, nobody got my name wrong. Nobody spelled it wrong. Nobody said things they didn't want to say. Basically, everything I put out there was used. right? So this is why I'm a big advocate for this approach. I think I'm gonna have to speed up. Okay, so here's what I call my instant bio system. If only bios could come in a can, right? So maybe I'll have to think about that, get it stocked at Walmart or Costco or things like that. Can you imagine? But anyway, I'm going to show you, and it kind of goes back to that inverted pyramid that I showed you already. But here's kind of the steps. If you're in a rush to write your bio, sit down in front of your laptop, your computer, and this is where you start. And oftentimes I just start with bullet points, right? Before I get into sentence and paragraph structure, right? I write down the basic information, right? So step one, right? Basic artist information. Who are they? Where are they from? Right? Influences, comparable artists, everything we've talked about, right? Then I go into step number two. Okay, what are all these things that I want to talk about with the new release? What's interesting, right? What do I want to share? How do I want to control the narrative in my bio? What do I want interviewers and journalists to ask me about? That's what I'm thinking about here, right? And again, new single is usually a starting point, but you can try other things as well. Really, whatever's relevant to your project. And then number three, again, connected to number two, is the artist quotes, right? So again, what is it going to be about? Single, concept, work with producers, location, whatever it is, that is your choice. Okay, and you're gonna basically just jot these things down. And what I tell people is just write. Just write. You can always edit down. It's easier to edit down than going from a blank page. So I just say just write stuff, whatever it is, and then as you get into the writing process, you take all of it and you kind of start to give it some shape structurally, paragraphs, sentences, etc. And then of course there's the fourth part. Right? So that's kind of your instant bio. And I've kind of done this approach and I've tested it, and I've done it where I said to the artist, send me, here's exactly what I want. Here's the 4 sections. Just give me the details, give me the facts, and just write some stuff down, make up some quotes, and then I'm going to shape it, right? And that's exactly what he did. Within an hour, we had a bio. I think they still use it to this day, right? So that's my kind of what I call my instant bio system. Okay, so to summarize the bio, excuse me, you have a new release. Basically, you have a new bio. I'm talking about EPs and albums. If you're going on a singles basis, you're probably not going to have a full bio. You're going to have a shorter bio, but the full bio usually accompanies new releases. So every new release equals a new bio, right? And then all these other things I have talked about, and so I don't have to run through them all, but the style and genre, influences, avoid the statements, but if you choose to make statements, remember to back them up. And moving here, cliches and empty hype, we don't want that. Rate the quotes. So I've covered all those points. Number 9 on this list is avoid gratuitous punctuation. Lots of exclamation marks. I see that quite often for some reason. I can't explain it. Or capitalization is another one. People think there's a word that's important to them, so they want to capitalize it. But that's not the way that the English language works, right? So just write the way you're supposed to write. And if you're unsure, by the way, I have these 2 resources I keep on hand. One's called the CP Style Guide, and one is Caps and Spelling. And they're probably on the desk of most journalists and most newsrooms. And I always have them around. I do a lot of writing, and so I have them there as a resource. Those tricky words to spell, or what's the proper style for this, etc. And then it's a matter of just writing, editing, rewriting. No different than you're creating a song. Sometimes you got to do some rewrites on your bios, and then again, limit yourself to 1 page. So those are that's your summary points. Okay, so let's go to some basic style rules. Style rules for me, when it comes to the title, right, of the project, the EP, the album, those should always appear in italics. So I gave you a couple of examples on the screen here. You can take a look at it, right? So the overarching project, right? So the EP, the album, right, will always appear in italics throughout your bio consistently. Number 2, the songs within that overarching project, right? Those will appear in quotation marks, right? Always consistently. So I give you just a couple of examples that you can see on the screen here, right? So titles of the EP and the album, italics, song titles, within that project in quotation marks. Standard operating procedure. I always like to suggest using active voice, especially in the attribution of your quotes. And so I put an example on the screen for you right there. Active voice, meaning not past tense, right? So this is my best single to date, says, right? That's active, that's conversational. It flows better, it reads better. And so always when you're doing attribution to quotes in your bios, use that active voice, avoid said. It just makes it flat and stale. Well, again, a choice for you to make. Names. This is something I edit all the time. So general rule, when you're introducing an artist and they have two names, so you use the full name on first reference and then the last name only on all subsequent references. Okay, simple rule. If you're an artist or you're working with an artist that's a single name artist, well, then it's not a concern. You don't have to worry about this. Obviously, the name's going to be the name when it comes to attribution. Okay, so that's a simple rule. And number 5, if you are incorporating press quotes around your bio, I generally don't like to put them within the body of the bio. If you ever heard the expression pull quote, maybe somewhere along the margins or at the bottom, I might have a quote from a media outlet or a journalist. I always like to have the journalist's name if I can. The name of the media outlet is ideal. I also like to put the country, right? Because imagine if somebody is writing about you from the UK or Japan or the USA, those are big markets, right? It immediately elevates you by including the country of origin of that blog or of that media outlet. And I also like putting the date in there, especially if it's current, right? Wow, okay, somebody's writing about this artist right now, right? Something's happening here. It shows activity, right? So I always like to do that. My general rule is sometimes people like to hang on to quotes. I have a 5-year best before date when it comes to quotes, unless it's super exceptional or super high level or influential. I try to kind of limit it within the last 5 years. Right? You kind of start pushing it. And once you go back to what you did 5+ years back. So try to keep that current if you can as well. And then if you're in a group situation or a band situation, it's a lot of names potentially if you have 3, 4, 5 members, for example. And if you start listing them all, which you have to, I'm sure you do as you're identifying the group in the bio, what I always like to do as a backup is separate the names and just simply list them at the end of a bio, right? And that's great, and the media certainly appreciates that. It's great for fact checking, spell checking, especially if they're meeting the band in person. They don't want to be kind of rifling through your bio, who's the bass player, who does this, or whatever the case may be. You just have a nice list, and then they can kind of cross-reference and identify whoever they need to identify. So I always like that as an option when I'm working with groups. So here's the versions, right? We're getting down to the last 3 versions. I'm in the last 10 minutes, so I'm going to be short on time, so I'm going to rush through this, and I apologize. I tend to do that. I talk too much. But long version, a page, we've talked about. The short version of the bio, I've seen this go anywhere from 50 to 150 words, and there's variations, right? So depending on what you're doing, oftentimes you're applying for grants, you're applying for festivals or competitions, whatever the case may be, and there might be a word count, right? So it could be anywhere from 50 to 150. If you follow the approach that I've just suggested in terms of writing your bio, well, if you start subtracting paragraphs from the bottom and working your way up, it becomes very easy. And oftentimes you don't have to do a lot of editing. Maybe a little bit of an adjustment to get to the word count that's required, but that short version becomes important, right? So you might have 50 or 75 or 100 words, depending on what the needs are. There's probably going to be maybe a little bit of editing required, but hopefully not too much, again, if you're subtracting bottom up, okay? The third one I call the social media or listing bio. That's that one sentence. It's kind of like what we call the elevator pitch when you introduce yourself. It's a sentence or two, right? This is who I am. This is where I'm from. This is the music that I do. And this is what I sound like type of thing, right? That's going to be that short introductory elevator pitch listing type bio that you see in publications, whether they're online, for local club listings. Oftentimes when somebody runs a photo of you, they have a caption or what we call a cut line underneath your photo. So these, 1 or 2 sentence social media or listing bios become very useful to you in these instances. So I would suggest you have one of those as well. Okay, and then there's a balance between what I call style and functionality. Right? It can look great, the design can be great, you can use all kinds of great typography, etc. But if I can't read it, then there's no point, right? So watch the fancy fonts and stuff like that. Make sure it's readable first and foremost. That's the first thing that I look at. Can I read the damn thing, right? But again, there is some leeway for creativity in your bio. You can design it up, consider visuals, right? So a logo, photos, right? In terms of the look, I always say short paragraphs that are easy on the eyes. I love those bios. I hate what I call the block paragraphs, you know, one long paragraph of a bio. I hate those things, and people right away are overwhelmed when they see them. So avoid those chunky block paragraphs. Of course, have some contact info and social media links as well. And I've only got about 5 minutes left, so it's okay because I think I can get through this pretty quickly. But the one sheet, right? And I'm throwing up some examples of some one sheets on the screen. And essentially, it's your bio, really the short version of your bio with some additional information that's highly designed, right? So usually, and you'll see here, there's the album is featured, the artwork, you'll see a photo, maybe there's some embedded audio or video, maybe there's some touring information or other release information. In the middle case, there's a bunch of information about sync placements. All of the social media stuff is there. And so really, it's you as the artist pulling together, what do I have to work with, right? What can I put into my one sheet, right? And this is a real major sales tool, right? And so you know, the way that you present yourself. So I refer to it as kind of a constantly active, it's an active and constantly updated kind of document, right? Because things happen, right? As new opportunities come, or more tour dates, or sync placements, or whatever the case may be. These are things that I keep updating my one sheets. I might do it weekly or at least monthly, depending how active I am or what I have going on, right? And it kind of helps me bridge the gap, right, between new releases, right? Remember, I've set my bio and I forget my bio, and then in the interim, I'm using my one sheet to make those updates, right, that are happening between the release. And I'm using that as a tool, right, when I'm pitching myself to festivals or to labels or publishers or whatever the case may be, right? I use that one sheet as a supporting document. Okay, and it's also customizable, right? So it can be very general in terms of your overall career, but as an example, I'm working with an artist right now who is also a songwriter. And so we're actually working on a customized one sheet that's specific for music publishers, and it's going to focus on all the songs that the artist has written for other people, right? So we're going to customize. Now, you don't want too many of these, but if you're a heavy touring band or touring artist, for example, or a DJ that does a lot of residencies, whatever the case may be, well, then maybe you want to have something specific to really what your focus, the focal point of your business is. And so I have one more point here, and that's when it's a new artist, the one sheet, you know, before I have a bio, before I get to an EP or album, I use the one sheet as an introduction, right, for new artists. It doesn't have a large history. So what's the possible content? What I have here is a very simple list of things that you can include on your one sheet, right? So there's about 2 pages here, or 3, but I'm just going to leave it there for a second. It's all pretty self-explanatory. We've touched on a lot of this information already. Again, what do you have to work with? What do you want to highlight, right? Sometimes you have a lot, sometimes you don't. You have to work with what you got. So maybe you're going to have more images or more graphics, etc. So we'll go through here, and then if I go to the second page, right, again, additional things that you might want to highlight in your one sheet. And at the bottom, I just made that note. Not all of these elements are required. You're not obligated to cram all of this, you know, all these 15 items, and maybe there's even more items in there. Maybe you've got corporate sponsorship or other things that are specific to your business that you want to highlight. You know, you can put that into the one sheet as well. These are just options for you to consider. Then it's up to you to figure out what's most relevant, what do you need, what should be the priority for your one sheet, and then you go with that. Okay. And then last, we get to the electronic press kit, right? The EPK, right? And so a lot of artists have been sending me one sheets saying, here's my EPK. And I'm going, hang on a sec, that's the one sheet. And the one sheet, because of the digital technology we have, that one sheet can be extended. I've seen these long one sheets that become 2, 3, 4 sheets in certain cases. But to me, there's a distinction between the one sheet and the EPK. And so when I think about EPKs, to me, the EPK is home, right, to all of your media, your PR assets, right? And a lot of these things are high-res files, right? Things that you don't want to necessarily have available freely on your website, right? So understand the difference. So the EPK, the press kit, is exactly that. It's the kit, it's the toolbox where you house all of the tools that you need for yourself and for your partners, right? Media industry, It always has to be current, right? Constant maintenance. One of the things that we recommend is that your EPK lives right on your website, right? Not in plain sight. It's just a hidden page, for example. And then when you're dealing with a promoter or you're dealing with a media outlet, you simply send them a link and say, here's the EPK, here's you get all the photos that you need, they're high res, there's my bio in there, there's a PDF version, and there's a Word file that you can manipulate if you so choose, and then anything else that you need. Generally, bios and photos are the top items. So think about what people are asking you for, and when you build your EPK, prioritize, have that information up at the top. If you're touring, well, maybe it's going to be something else. Maybe your input list or your technical writer is going to be a part of your EPK, right? Especially if you're using it a lot. And if you're looking for resources in terms of how to build your EPK, I've listed a couple right at the bottom there. Bandzoogle and Sonic Bids are two that come to mind. And then what can you include in your EPK? Again, there's all of this information. So I'll leave it on the screen for a second. We're at 4 o'clock, and this is really the end of it, of the presentation. So I apologize for rushing a bit here at the end, but again, here's all the elements that you can potentially consider for your EPK. I'll go to the last page. Again, there's so many things here, and it's up to you to decide what do you have to work with. And this is just me basically riffing off the top of my head. I'm sure there's more as you go through, okay? That's your EPK. I am at 4 o'clock. We're out of time. Thank you for those of you who joined this webinar. I gotta say, it felt weird talking to a screen and just seeing myself. I hope you got something out of it. Enjoy the rest of the Virtual Electronic Music Summit. Thanks again for having me. I think this is going to be available. My email is there. You can follow Canada's Music Incubator at CM Incubator is our handle on our website. And again, I'm doing one-on-one meetings on Saturday and Sunday, and you are welcome to sign up. Spots are still available. Thank you for attending. Everybody have a great summit.